Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Naval Q. Cassiano, and I'm a literacy coach based out of Chicago, Illinois. I am so excited to introduce you to tonight's presenters, Melanie Meehan and Kelsey Sorum. Melanie has been an elementary writing and social studies coordinator in Simsbury, Connecticut since 2012. She is co-author of Two Writing Teachers, a blog dedicated to the teaching of writing, and her first book, Every Child Can Write, was published by Corwin Press in 2019. Kelsey spends each day co-constructing literacy experiences centered on children, liberation, and equity alongside nearly 30 first graders at a progressive school in Brooklyn, New York. Her first book, co-authored with Melanie, was just released this month. It's called The Responsive Writing Teacher, a hands-on guide to child-centered equitable instruction. In today's ILA webinar, Melanie and Kelsey will be sharing their framework for responsive writing instruction, offering guides and tools applicable in both remote and in-person settings. Together, we're going to learn how to shift agency from ourselves to our K-5 learners. The goal is being empowered to make modifications to curriculum and instruction based on the academic, linguistic, cultural, and social emotional identities and abilities of all of our students. There's going to be time for Q&A at the end of this presentation. So if you have any questions for Kelsey and Melanie, feel free to submit them at any time by using the Zoom Q&A feature or posting them in the comments on the Facebook live stream video. If you're tweeting along, please remember to tag ILA using @ILA Today and the hashtag ILA Webinar. And if you'd like to rewatch or share this event with a colleague, a closed caption recording will be available within 10 days on Zoom and on Facebook. And without further ado, please welcome Melanie and Kelsey.
Oh, thank you, Naval. That was a really nice introduction. I appreciate that. So we were just going to start with a little bit of background information about how this book began, because really when Kelsey and I first envisioned it, it was around toolkits. And the more that we talked about it and reflected and revised and thought and talked, the more it became, how do we think about responsiveness when we're making toolkits? And that's what we're really going to be talking about today. And we'll be talking about the 4 domains that we landed on, because through a lot of conversations, and we have vivid memories of some of them. One of them, I was even like literally in a traffic jam, not moving. Kelsey could like attest to that, right? We kind of landed on 4 specific domains, one being academic, one linguistic, one cultural, and one social emotional. And that's what really grounds and anchors the work, and it grounds the presentation as well as our book. So moving on from there, I'm gonna tip it over to Kelsey to talk about grounding us in kids and thinking about the students in front of us.
Thank you, Mel. And I want to echo what Melanie said. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Naval, for that introduction. It looks like we've got people coming from all around the world. So thank you for being here with us tonight. Melanie and I had a lot of questions as we worked together, but one thing that we knew is that when it comes to responsive teaching, students are at the center. And one way I've learned to notice when I'm off center is when I start feeling there's tons and tons of things to do, which happens all the time as teachers. This kind of brings us into, or brings me into a doing mode instead of a present being mode. So before we begin tonight, we'd like to invite you to have a collective grounding together, centering the work to come with who it's really about and who it's really for, and that's students. So we're going to ask you and join with you in doing this to picture some writers that you work with. And you might close your eyes and do this if that feels safe to you. You might jot these names down. This might be a class of writers or a writer that's been on your mind lately, or maybe someone who hasn't been as present in your awareness. And then take a moment to really picture them. So I'm gonna also do that. And then we invite you to describe them as writers and as children in nouns and in verbs. And this is something that Sarah K. Ahmed encourages us to do in Being the Change. If you need some inspiration, these are some names, nouns, and verbs that kids at my school have given themselves just today on Zoom. We invite you to jot this somewhere nearby so you can keep it close as we continue tonight. And we also invite you to share these nouns and verbs in the chat.
So as you're doing that, I'm going to give just a little bit of a preview of our time together. So as I said in the first slide, we're going to be talking through the 4 domains of responsiveness. And again, that grounds our work, that grounds our book, that grounds this presentation. We're also going to be talking about the opportunities that exist for responsiveness within writing instruction. So as we go through the presentation tonight, we'll talk about the different elements of writing instruction, but our focus will be on demonstration texts. I'm going to say something loudly for the back. You will have 5 to 7 minutes to work on some writing tonight. So have your pen ready, have your keyboard ready, whatever you do. We are going to be inviting you to do a little bit of writing tonight. We will be helping you through that, because before we ask you to do that, we'll be identifying different types of demonstration texts and talking you through those, and really supporting you on the way. We're not putting the pressure on you. We don't expect perfect, but that is kind of a preview of the time that we'll be spending together.
Before we go on, I invite you to scroll, take a minute to scroll through the chat and look at these nouns and verbs and seeing some themes throughout them. So I'm going to hold those close as we continue. So the work of responsiveness is ever evolving. There's an abundance of work and research and resources available to support teachers with engaging students and meeting their needs. And what Melanie and I were really interested in is instilling a concrete and actionable process for responsive practice. So through the action research that we did in our own schools, we thought about students, about the different aspects of them as learners, about the different aspects of them that instruction must adapt to, not the other way around. And in doing this, we funneled responsive practice into 4 domains, 4 lenses or considerations that have become really ingrained in our practice. And it's important to note that in the same way that a student's skills and languages and multiple identities, habits of mind, interests are not separate entities of their being, they're all at play simultaneously while they write, while they learn. So in that same way, these domains of responsiveness are not mutually exclusive, nor are the responsive practices that we make within them. So there is a blurriness between them, and also they really build off of one another. We also wanted to note that we were so lucky to have a conversation with Cornelius Minor, in which he shared that he considers his work to be a contribution to an ongoing body of work that people will also take and contribute to and question. So our considerations and understandings of these domains are not complete. They continuously evolve as we learn, and they're imperfect. So we hope that you will question with us and add your perspectives and your experiences and join us in expanding them.
So I get to kick us off thinking about the academic responsive domain, and that's sort of like the one that we all start with, right? It's like, what do kids know and what do they need to know? What do we want them to learn? It's really the knowledge and skills. So as we think about that, I think about the anchor charts that hang in the room that really tell what we want kids to learn. I think about the process charts that tell them how that they're gonna do something, take on a task. I think about strategy charts where we think about the different ways to do something. But really that academic responsiveness is about what kids know and are able to do, both at that moment and what our goals are for them to learn throughout our teaching. think that one of the things that has really, really happened to me during this whole last year of teaching and working with kids online is I've become really aware of how important it is to lead with assets, like really lead with what kids are bringing academically, as opposed to what I need to teach them academically or what they don't have academically. And I would just really emphasize that as a way of thinking. They're so quick to shut their computers down or shut off their videos as soon as there's a weakness or a deficit that's perceived. And I would just say, as far as an academic responsiveness, the more that I lead with what you've got, what you know, what you already can do, the better that is. So I just really emphasize that as far as that academic responsive domain is concerned. A lot of links between the academic responsive and the linguistic, where we're going next. As Kelsey was saying, there's so much blurriness between these domains. But again, if we just, it helps me with the academic to think, what do kids know and are able to do, and what do I want them to learn?
So as Mel said, we often start with that academic response, at least in the processing that Melanie and I have used. And next, we consider linguistic responsiveness. And this encompasses the many ways that language is active in the learning and writing process. We've already seen someone share in the chat, Janetta, about one of her students who uses academic vocabulary effectively. So one way we can think about linguistic responsiveness is through the development of content-specific vocabulary and language structures. And another way to think about it is through speech and language processing skills, as well as receptive and expressive communication. Of course, we can also think of it as we're supporting students with English language acquisition. So how can we support all of these things and make modifications in our practice through writing and in our instruction?
So then we move, whoops, sorry, Kelsey.
That's okay. And next, a really important part of linguistic responsiveness considers the immersion of students' native languages and dialects. So authors like Lisa Delpit and Dr. April Baker Bell name the reality that linguistic racism exists in schools, and how important it is for students to know that to be multilingual in this world is an asset. One, in writing that allows them to reach larger audiences. And this can be done through translanguaging in the classroom, or writing in their native language first, and then writing in English. It comes up with hearing authors read books in their native language, when they hear and see and speak in ways which honor their identity. And this really important part of their identity, as Lisa Delpit so beautifully describes here. So linguistic responsiveness considers academic English, which is dominant in literature. And it considers this as it is a focus in classrooms as an addition to Aperture, another tool that students can use to communicate, but it does not center it as correct and the only way to communicate. And it also is careful not to other home languages and dialects, such as African American vernacular English. So linguistic responsiveness is a really big one and a really exciting one for us to think about in our classroom.
Sort of just as exciting to me is thinking about the cultural responsiveness, and this one really leans into knowing the identities of kids and thinking about who they are when they're not in school, what grounds them, how they operate. Could be languages, could be around religions, could be around what they do at home, could be the way that they take in information and relay information, right? That's sort of a way of thinking culturally. I've been doing a lot of work around Zaretta Hammond and her culturally responsive teaching in the brain, and thinking about really being responsive and thinking about collectivism versus individualism and how do we work that in. So I think that one of the really blurry areas for me when I'm thinking about cultural responsiveness versus social emotional responsiveness and interests is, you know, we can know kids and what they're interested in. They might be interested in fishing, and that could be an interest, and it could also be something along the lines of culture. I think about the beautiful picture book, A Different Pond, where the little boy goes fishing with his grandfather, both because he loves fishing, but also because that is what they do for their livelihood. That's like part of their work, and it's ingrained in them. So it's really paying attention to what's important to those two children at the very core of their identity and the identity of the families. So we can really pay attention to that piece as we think about working with kids.
Really appreciate the contributions happening in the chat right now as well. Thank you for making this a dialogue.
I can't see the chat, so I'm in the really pressureful seat of being the one sharing my screen and working the slides. So if there's anything that's really great in the chat that you want to speak out, I'd love to hear it. I'm not going to try to run the slides and see the chat at the same time.
So each of these domains really contribute to student engagement. And the way that social emotional responsiveness does this is through the inclusion of student interests, which Melanie has already touched upon, and also through purposeful and relevant work that's driven by shared experiences, community, and world news. And many times, especially in the last year, we respond to news that happens overnight. We saw in the chat earlier, there are kids who are suffering, kids who woke up today, students who are Burmese. When we're thinking of responsiveness across the domains, that social emotional responsiveness really looks into the well-being of students and how writing can be a means for healing and purpose. So that's one way that we can think about it. And then another way that we've thought about it is through the development of a growth mindset. So some questions that I really loved that Melanie posed with me were, how in writing, how can we weave lessons in writing, in our instruction and in the books and texts that we're creating and sharing with kids? How can writing in its many forms and genres serve essential purposes like teaching and storytelling, shifting perspective, advocating, connecting, healing, resisting, and responding to injustice? Just this morning, after the violence that happened last night, there was so many people responding via writing that was a really important thing that we can involve students in as well. And then finally, we can think, what growth mindset and social emotional learning related lessons and messages can we explicitly and implicitly weave into our instruction? So again, through lessons, through conferences with kids, through the texts that we write with kids, and in the books that we study.
So again, what we really want to just emphasize here is that all of these domains of responsiveness all really center the child. And one of the things that Kelsey hasn't said, but I'm going to say, is that Kelsey created all of these visuals. Like a lot of the visuals that appear in the books that you read are oftentimes created by designers. And a lot of the visuals that are in our book are created by Kelsey, including the ones that you're seeing on all of these slides. So just a big shout out to her and the visual representations that she's created for this, because I think that they're so beautiful, but they're also so powerful. So I can't see the chat, but I hope that you're giving her high fives in it.
Coming through, thank you.
So this is a chart, and this chart exists at the end of each of our chapters. And what this chart is and does is it gives you a chance to kind of interact and think about how you would take on that element of writing instruction. So we're putting this chart into the chat right now. If you want to print it, if you want to copy it, download it, start filling it out. If you want to just make a quick grid on a piece of paper. What I would just say is start thinking about the students in your classrooms, in your world, who come into your realm, and start thinking, who are they? What do they like? What do they do? And I have my example that I started creating. You can see it's not perfect. I've got arrows going all over the place. I started thinking, this is where I started thinking, okay, is it cultural or is it interest when I'm thinking about fishing or hair or cooking? You know, where is that falling? And I'm not sure that it matters so much which category it goes into, as much as it matters that we're thinking about it and being responsive and having the instruction aiming at the kids. Like, again, thinking about the kids at the center of that graphic that came before. So I would just give you a couple of minutes here. I'm not really going to pause in the middle of the presentation for a couple of minutes, but I am going to just say, spend some time, whether it's here or whether it's in your own free time or whether it's your brain starting to work on this, like just think about who you have and what you would say about them in terms of academics, in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of interests. Like, how are you thinking about those kids who you're talking to and seeing every day?
This would also be a time to revisit those words used to describe kids earlier in the chat and think about, where do those aspects of them come to play within these domains? Is it through the genres that they're studying, or through the topics in the books that you're including, or engaging them in through multiliteracy? So and keep that in mind as well.
So I want to just take time going back and thinking about the opportunities that we have for responsiveness within writing instruction. And Kelsey, you were going to talk through some of the bullets here.
Yeah, so I see. So we're skipping ahead of one here. Absolutely.
So as we thought about the book, and we can come back, again, this was my mistake in the slides. This slide was coming beforehand, and when I was going through, I came through it fast because we really wanted to talk about the opportunities that exist in writing instruction for responsiveness. And in the book, we have 6 chapters where they're all grounded within those domains. And we have our 4 domains where we have, as we think about assessment, but we also think about the planning that we do with them. We think about the mentor text, we think about the charts. Tonight, you're really going to be thinking about the demonstration text, which we said, again, just a reminder, as you're thinking about those kids and as you're really like processing through them, you're going to be thinking, what is a piece of writing that I can create for those students that's going to be really attentive and thinking and responding to those different domains. So that is again how we've grounded the book and how we're thinking about the elements of writing instruction. And then in addition, we've got the different things that happen on a daily basis within writing instruction, right? So we have the context, we have the different connections, we've got the authors, the text we choose, we've got the illustrations and the visuals that hang on the wall. So those all are existing for us, and that's a pretty cool thing.
Melanie, thank you for leading on that one. It was beautifully said, and all I'll add is that what is really important here is that students know every day when they show up to school that they're going to show in the learning. When they show up as writers every day, which takes a lot, that they're going to show through these elements of instruction that Melanie just described.
So again, I'm going to be skipping ahead of the slides that we just showed just because I had skipped that one and I don't want to. And we're going to go back to thinking about that demonstration text and the idea that if there's a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you write it. And Kelsey, please talk about Rasha's work because it's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. So my friend and colleague, Rasha Hamid, says that the best children's books can't be bought. They're the ones that we make and that we make with kids. And this was something that she actually did while she was teaching in Sudan and searching for a book all about Sudan, or a book that portrayed Sudan to use in her writing class. And it didn't exist yet. So this was a problem that Rasha saw, and she created it with kids. And through that, they demonstrated research and writing in the informational genre. And the book that they created ended up inspiring a book that Rasha published called Kadisa Kadisa. So please look up Rasha Hamid, and this book is treasured by my 2-year-old nephew, my first graders, and adults. Oftentimes it's happened to us that the books that we need don't exist, just like it happened to Rasha. And this has certainly been the case in the last year. In my own classroom, we needed to make books that modeled wearing masks and staying safe during the pandemic, and those books didn't exist yet. And texts that demonstrated sending messages of hope and love in protests and windows and on the streets, and also texts that demonstrated staying connected through letters in their many forms. So we wrote these texts, and we wrote them for students, and we wrote them with students. And in doing so, we involved them and invited them in on the writing process through the use of demonstration texts.
So really closely related to the idea of demonstration text, and one of the reasons that we did block out 5 to 7 minutes for writing time during this presentation. Again, that's coming up, a few minutes of quiet time for you to try out some of the writing. A really core and centered belief of both of ours is the importance of having teachers writing. And again, Kelsey made this beautiful visual, but it really outlines and enumerates the important reasons and the skill sets that we gain when we write. So we develop empathy, we are authentic, we can say, yes, that is hard. Like right now we're in the middle of the slice of life, writing every single day for 31 days and looking around and trying to find those stories. And there are days when you're like, I don't know what I'm gonna write. And it's hard. And so also we can spy on ourselves as writers and think, what's really hard in there, and what am I doing, and what's the brain work that I'm doing that I can then translate to kids in a really responsive and effective kind of a way. So just say, be brave with writing. Like if you are not a teacher who writes yet, really get behind yourselves and get a nudge, because it makes a difference in instruction.
So every tool has a specific purpose, and a demonstration text is a tool we can use in the classroom. Kids know what these purposes are if they're shown it, if they get to practice with it, and that comes from us having a strong sense of the purpose. I've witnessed this most recently in the last week through a week-long project of taking apart an old projector with a big toolbox, and kids knowing exactly what tools to lean on to take all the things apart. So a demonstration text is a tool. It's a text that is created, co-constructed, or revised with children. And it models text elements, it models skills, it models strategies. And like any tool, there are different types that serve different purposes. So to model all of the genre-specific text elements that students will learn throughout a unit, you can use and annotate an exemplar text. And this is a great one to start with, especially at the beginning of a unit. And it's also one that we'll think together tonight. And to model a strategy, or as one of the many and one of the favorite things that I've learned from working with Melanie is to offer a choice of strategies for kids, is to use a strategy demonstration text, which Melanie has shown beautifully in the example there. And then to practice any of these things, a text element, skill, or strategy with students, we can use a co-constructed demonstration text. And in doing this, we can share the pen at intentional moments. Like in this text here, it was showing the feelings through dialogue and body language. And finally, to show how a text element, skill, or strategy develops, we can use a progression of demonstration text. So this shows how something evolves, and Melanie's done this here so her students can see, can actually see how it evolves and kind of figure out where they are and what they can do to do it in even a more developed way as they're practicing skills.
Yeah, what's really, really nice about a progression is that it can give kids kind of like a little preview of the next step. Like it makes it possible, right? Like what's your entry point going to be and how can you reach for the very next place? And that's what's great about a progression. You can kind of think, I'm going to make this easier, and I'm also going to link it with things that get a little bit tougher. And all of a sudden it seems more doable for kids, which is a nice thing about making those progressions. I want to just say, because again, we're going to be asking you to take a try or a stab at thinking about an exemplar text. The piece with the double Dutch is really an incredible piece of text, because when we look at it, it's 5 lines. And what we can really check out on that when we're thinking about the different domains of responsiveness is how much it hits at each of those domains. So, I just like, it gives me like kind of goosebumps when I think about the kids in Kelsey's room getting to see that piece of text and think, okay, like academically, I can do that. And maybe that's a piece where you could throw a label on it or two and make it even more academically responsive that way. But it just is like within their realm of knowledge and skills. They're like, yeah, I can do that. But we've also got linguistic responsiveness going on because it explains what double Dutch is. So as we're looking at it, it just very cleverly explains what it is. And it even weaves in assimilate. So we've got that going on in there. The cultural responsive piece of double Dutch being something that this group of kids does and loves is incredible. So we've got that going on. But the piece that I love the most about it is the message that it sends that you don't even quite get until you read it carefully and you think about it. Because I don't know about anybody else, I've tried doing double Dutch and there's no way. Like I've got everything I can do with just a single jump rope. And after 4 kids, that's not really something I do. People can kind of know what I mean. But double Dutch is hard, right? Like that's a really hard skill. And what this piece gives is this little hint of a growth mindset, because it's like, you're going to stay with it and you're going to try doing something. And maybe that's a message that this class needs to have. And it's just tucked into a piece that is so responsive across the other domains. So that's a really nice thing. What I'm also just going to say is, like, we get overwhelmed thinking about writing, and this isn't a big piece. Like, right? It's just like 5 lines that we were able to capture so much. So again, writing with your kids and creating those demonstration texts is doable. You got this.
Yeah. Some notes from the chat, Mel, if you don't mind going back. Someone mentioned it looks like boys are turning the ropes. Usually girls are seen, that's something girls are seen to do. And gender is definitely something that that is at play. And we've thought about it through the identities and the cultural responsiveness, but that's a place for those implicit messages come through in the illustrations and books and in charts. And another quick fun note about this text, this was written by my colleague Katie Lee, and we had a demonstration text writing kind of party after school one day, and we sat together and thought about our kids and what they were working on, and we each created an exemplar text at a couple different at a couple different levels, and then we photocopied them and shared them. So this was something that was also super engaging for my kids that my friend had written, and it brings in that partnership of writing that Melanie was talking about with Slice of Life. So we've outlined the 4 domains of responsiveness. We've named the purposes of the different types of demonstration texts. And now, in the spirit of action and writing with a community, we're going to spend some time planning and creating a text to use with students. So these essential questions will help with creating a tool that is responsive, a demonstration text. And we'll return to this slide as we work together, but of course, screenshotting now is an option if that's of preference.
Love a good screenshot.
Oh yeah.
So your steps for thinking about making a demonstration text, dun, 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 right? You've been thinking about the students in your classroom. We got you started with that when we first brought in the Sarah Ahmed work and thought about nouns and verbs. We kept it going when we gave you the chart to think about the grid that I had filled out so beautifully with all the cross-offs and arrows here and there. Right, we've said think about kids. We put the kids right at the center of domains. So you've been thinking about them. What you're going to do is decide on your genre. So we've got Double Dutch, which was clearly the information piece. I would say if you've got a writing piece, if you're in the middle of a writing unit, maybe you want to do that one. If you know you've got something coming up, think about taking that on. If you're like, okay, well, I need a lot of time for this. I'm going to think about the unit that I have coming up when I return in the summer. Think about that. If you have a favorite unit that you just feel super comfortable with, take that one on. But make a decision about whether you're going to, which genre you're going to do. And I would just say narrative, information, or opinion when I'm thinking about that. Then you're going to lean into the considerations and the questions that frame those 4 domains. So again, I'll put that slide back up and I'll leave that up for you so you'll have it, but you're really going to have those considerations and the questions. If you screenshot it, that's great. If not, it'll be up there for you. We're going to give you 5 to 7 minutes. We might interrupt a little bit and say, ooh, think about this, or ooh, think about that. But I'm gonna just hit my timer for 5 minutes. I'm just looking at the time and where we are, and let you have that. And when we come back, we'll have we'll invite you to share some of the experiences of doing that. So do a little bit of spying on yourself as you get going with this. Just how does it feel? What's going through my head? Like, how is this, what's helping me? What's holding me back? We'll give you that time. If we could just throw that document into the chat, if it's helpful to you to really take on the planning part first, and you know, this is where writing process comes into play. There are some of us, Kelsey, I'm looking at you, who really appreciate the time for planning as opposed to just jumping right in with that writing. Take the time with the planning chart and really think, okay, what is it that I'm gonna do? How am I gonna create that? And you might spend time with your planning chart rather than just jumping right into writing. So we invite you to do either one. And that being said, I'm setting my timer. I'm gonna be a little quieter here.
I'm gonna get started on my outline. Melanie said is where I start thinking these questions. If you're like Melanie, you'll start drafting right away. See plan. My favorite genre is coming up, which is poetry. So I'm super excited to think through a poetry demonstration text.
That'll rattle everyone, Cal, since I didn't mention that as a genre. It's interesting to see like some of the numbers hover down, like it's like, ooh, you're gonna have us right. I'm like, no, just a few minutes. So again, if you are doing any drafting now, and I'd love to believe that some of you are, be thinking about the language that you're using. So are you using simple sentences? Are you including a question if that's something you're working on? Maybe you're teaching higher grade levels and you want to include really with intention some complex sentences or some compound sentences. Like you could be a little bit cognizant of incorporating that kind of a variety. That's something that you can do here. You could use a vocabulary word and work on defining it.
I'm thinking a lot about returning to on-site instruction for part of our class. The skills and next step, it's an even wider range than I previously experienced. So I'm trying to think about, in terms of the academic responsiveness, what components of poetry can everyone enter the work in? For me, I'm thinking about using repetition, being a great thing for kids to practice who are still practicing high frequency words or spelling, but also something that kids can think in through repeating whole phrases. Thinking about showing big feelings in poems, using exact describing words. Everyone can enter those skills from where they are. And then in that small group work is where we can differentiate and meet kids where they are.
Couple more minutes. Again, with your group of students, if you're thinking there's a message that you want to deliver, if there's a bunch of kids who don't like to take risks, maybe there's a message that comes through in your piece about taking risks. Maybe there are kids who are worrying. Maybe there's a message that you want to create about being brave. You want to have your piece about where academically they're functioning. Then just take another minute. Finish washing the dishes, finish getting the coffee. Like everybody's like, yeah, we're writing. I hope you are. Again, I'm watching the time. It's just another 30 seconds. So as you finish your sentence, it's hard to do this and know that, if we were there with you, we could see heads down, people writing, we could judge the engagement. We can't totally, but finish whatever it is that you're working on and kind of bring yourself back. And take some time to just reflect on what was that like. Again, we're kind of spying on ourselves as learners and as writers and as thinkers about doing all of this. So you have that learning, and you also have maybe a piece that's going to get started. So maybe in the chat, you could share something that you noticed about yourself as a writer. Maybe you can share the responsive topic or the purpose of your demonstration text. So if you could share that, that's a gift to everybody else who's here, because somebody might say, oh my gosh, I didn't think about hopscotch. That's a great one. Or, maybe you just had a great topic that you're like, could be helping somebody else. If you have any ideas about the 4 domains that you want to share with the group, this would be a great time to put that in there, or anything else that's just coming to your mind that you're like, this would be something to share and add to the whole experience for everybody? We invite you to put that into the chat.
I'm going to try to screenshot this chat for the ideas as well, or jot them down. And Carol has asked, do all texts encompass all of the domains? And you know, certainly our instruction all the time does not. It's what, you know, is strived for, but maybe something you'll share is the ones that come most natural to you, or the ones you do the most.
I would say that for that one of the things when I look back on that pizza strategy one that is up, that is mine, if I had that one to do over again, I might have it be I might not have it be pizza. I might have it be a different culture, food, or something like that. I think that we can push ourselves as we broaden our thinking about it.
And Melanie, someone talked about writing a food review where students will sample yogi tea and explore the touch, smell, and taste of the ingredients.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to just share more of the chat before I kind of say final words about this last slide, Kels? Is there anything more?
There's so much more. I could share every one of them. I'm taking a screenshot now so that you can enjoy this as well. And oh my goodness, all the ideas.
So what we just really want to finish with and say and emphasize is that these domains have helped us a lot. Like, they've pushed my demonstration text, they've pushed my mentor text, they've pushed the way I think about charts, they've pushed everything I do about my writing instruction. But I think that they also push instruction across all content areas. And I would just say, like, we can be responsive across these 4 domains, whether it's writing or reading or math or science or social studies, whatever it is. And it's a really nice schema and way to think, how am I thinking about the kids who are within my classroom and my purview and my responsibility, and really honoring who they are and how they learn and take in the world.
Okay, Melanie and Kelsey, on behalf of ILA, thank you so much for being here tonight. We would also like to thank the sponsor of this webinar, Corwin Literacy, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We're gonna try to get to as many as we can. Some of them you've started to answer, and one of them is around our youngest writers, our pre-K kids. What suggestions do you have for demonstration texts for students who are just starting to get a grasp on alphabetic composition?
Mm. I could take this one, Mel, if that's okay. This is my heart area. 2 things came to mind right away. One is, I mean, kids are so engaged when you share your own, like, true writing with them. And I've copied other people's demonstration texts before, and they know when it's yours, and they are very excited about it. There's something really special about using another student's text as a demonstration text that also feeds in the domains of responsiveness, building identity as writer, and the perspective and representation coming in. But when they see kids work, there's something that makes them feel like, I can do this too, whether it's someone in your classroom or someone from a previous year. I try to keep a habit of saving work. And then through that, you know, you could use that, and you could ask them what they notice about it, and annotate it, highlight it. You might also help the writer revise it and say, this, oh my goodness, can you believe the writing that this student has made, this author in our classroom? And one thing that they're working on is this. And we asked their permission. They said that we could help them do this. So we're going to do it together right now. And I might do this, I use a writing workshop model. So I might do this in the share after the lesson, or even as the lesson itself. The other one that I find myself using most often is co-constructed writing. So again, interactive writing, even if it's shared writing, anything that they're producing and contributing to alongside alongside you. And then as you're sharing the pen, you might, that's where we can meet kids where they are. So I might have one student who's building knowledge of concepts about print come up and point as we are rereading our text. I might invite someone else up to maybe we'll pause and write one of the words together, especially if what we're demonstrating is spelling tricky words. So depending on what that word is and who I want to engage and support at that moment, whether it's an initial sound or a really long word that we're including vowels or word parts in. You'll have to stop me. I could go on.
I'm loving watching the chat now that I can see it. I don't have the pressure of having the full screen and just the small boxes. But Lara, I love the comment about neatness. One of the things that I do also when I'm doing demonstration text with young kids is very purposefully and intentionally use cross-offs. Like just whoop, crossed off, keep going. I can't tell you how sad I get when I watch the erasers going back and forth on the Zoom screens. I'm like, just cross off and keep going. I don't want perfect. Like,
yeah, that speaks to your initial point of showing that we are not, we're vulnerable to, and nothing is. Yeah, I think that's important to process. So that being said, we have some questions around cultural competency. And what are your thoughts on incorporating culturally responsive demonstration text if your classroom is not very, very diverse in terms of student makeup? And at the same time, are every demonstration text that you're creating hitting every single domain?
I think that you can hit every single domain the more aware that you are. When we first started writing this book, I used to have a demonstration text that was all about how important writing is. And I thought it was so good. I was like, it's so responsive. This is great. And then what I realized, I no longer use that text anymore because it's really just not that interesting to kids on a cultural and social, emotional kind of a level. It may have really great linguistic structures and be academically right there, but it's not so interesting. So we can push ourselves to get there. I think that's kind of the nice thing about those domains. Are you there with every single one? No, but is it something to kind of think about and have in your mind? Yeah, it's really helpful. So that's something. And then as far as the cultural competence and the expanding the views of the world, I think about Rudine Sims Bishop and her world and the way she talks about, if you haven't watched her 2-minute talk about mirrors and windows, you can find it on Reading Rockets. If you Google her, it's worth taking the 2 minutes to watch. But she talks about the importance of everybody seeing an expansive, inclusive representation within their classroom and their books, just because that way we don't get too big of a view of ourselves, right? Like it's important for everybody, no matter what they're looking at around themselves in terms of classroom and makeup, to realize that the world is made up of lots of different people and colors and talents and ways of being. So I'd say take a listen to that.
Absolutely. I think we have time for one more question. Can you explain for participants whether the demonstration text, what part of the workshop demonstration text can be used in?
Kelsey, you want to go with that one?
Sure. And yes, super side note, teeniest add-on, as we are portraying many identities, especially if they're not ones that we carry for ourselves, is doing so authentically in demonstration texts. So that's something else that is really important to think about. Sorry. In terms of when to use demonstration text and how, really they can be used at any part. Through the mini lesson, if I see some people are talking about, like, and this is a social emotional connection, like kids who are stuck on like perfection in writing and having to know, is everything right? That could be our teaching point, is that that sometimes we see in our class, like, we want our writing to be perfectly readable. instead of being perfectly spelled. So we can model that in the lesson. We certainly use them a lot in small groups. Even Mel talked about having toolkits in the beginning, like we keep some on hand. So even in conferences, if you see a kid is working on a specific skill and you have an example of that you can take out and say, you notice how this writer did that. You can try that too, or let's try it on this text that I've started, and then practice in yours. And then of course in the share, and that's a great time to highlight students' work with their permission and consent to revise it or edit together, or highlight things that they've done.
Kelsey, are you using demo text and mentor text synonymously is one of the questions.
Oh gosh, I might have. No, I wouldn't intentionally, but it's possible that I have.
Okay.
But I do, you know, there's like, they have similar purposes, right? So, and I've also used student work as a mentor text. Absolutely. And a demonstration text. Yeah.
Melanie, do you want to differentiate between the two before we finalize?
Yeah, so a demonstration text is written, and we have 2 chapters on it, right? One is mentor text and one is demonstration text. Demonstration text we can take and we can really meet students where they are. So it's an instructional tool. We can create it. We can meet students where they are. There was just a question in the chat about what about when students are overwhelmed and they think they can't do that. That's where the beauty of the demonstration text comes in, because we can tailor it to exactly where that student is, and we can create it right at that level so that there's that feeling of competence and confidence that I can do it, which we want to build. Sometimes mentor texts are more the published text. We can use student work as mentors, but it's more the published text. And sometimes those are overwhelming for kids to look at and think, oh, it's so beautiful, I can't possibly write like that. So to me, demonstration text gives kids entryways and pathways in that maybe mentor texts don't normally do.
Yeah, speak to the process, absolutely. It has been so fun to be here with you today. Another huge thank you to Melanie and Kelsey for sharing their time and expertise with us this evening. And for anyone interested in sharing their book, The Responsive Writing Teacher, a hands-on guide to child-centered equitable instruction, you can use the code ILA25 at corwin.com to receive a 25% discount. And thank you to all of you for joining us and for asking such great questions. I hope that everyone can walk away tonight feeling prepared to ground their teaching in inclusion and equity so we can foster student agency and truly empower our students through their writing.
And Naval and Melanie, Melanie, can you go to the next slide? Some people are looking for those references. Make sure they get it. Thank you. Thank you, Naval. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, everyone.
Remember too that a closed caption recording of this webinar will be available within 10 days. And please keep an eye on the ILA digital events webpage for an additional on-demand content and upcoming webinars and learning opportunities. If you're not already following ILA on social media, make sure to do so for the most up-to-date information. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.